skull in English. Prior to the first Christian emperor Constantine the Great repurposing this site as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it had been a temple of Venus. Before the Romans worshipped Venus, she was known in the Greek world as Aphrodite. And if we dig deeply enough, we find yet another layer on top of the Egyptian Isis. The notion of Christianity layering Egyptianism is nothing new. Here is Albrecht Dürer's Renaissance depiction of the Man of Sorrows by the column. Note Christ's unmistakable Egyptian crook and flail posture. This is Dürer's secret depiction of Christ as Osiris, the resurrected God. Dürer then shows Christ being flagellated with said symbols in this later etching. Here is Osiris with his characteristic crook and flail in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Osiris as Lord of the Dead presides over the weighing of souls ceremony. Anubis measures the dead man's heart on the scale against Mot's feather of truth. Her husband Thoth, scribe of the gods, records the result. If the heart is lighter than the feather, Horus will present the man's soul to Osiris in the duat. But if not, it will be devoured by the deadly Ammit, the monster who was part crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus. Mot is currently personified as Lady Justice, holding scales and sword. Lady Justice adorns courthouses around the world. Here she is in the old Supreme Court chamber in the U.S. Capitol. The scales of justice were also used in Christianity in the Last Judgment. Here are 15th century depictions showing souls being weighed and judged. The beasts of hell certainly recall the terror inspired by Ammit. Spell 125 in the Egyptian Book of the Dead lists what later became the Ten Commandments in Judeo-Christian theology. Everything goes back to Egypt. If you ask someone off the street where the holiest spot in Christianity is, you probably won't hear the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Most will think of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The word Peter literally means rock, and when Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church," Simon became Peter. Thinking on all the rocks I'd been studying in Jerusalem, it was natural for me to draw a line from the rock of Golgotha to the tomb of St. Peter in Rome. Here we go again. The line connecting Golgotha with the tomb of St. Peter passes directly over the center of the Campidoglio, marked today by the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. What we see in the Campidoglio is Michelangelo's vision for the top of the Capitoline Hill, the ancient world's original capital. It took a Renaissance genius to symbolically turn the Roman power equation on its head. So instead of having the Capitoline face the ancient Roman Forum, as it had for 2 millennia, Michelangelo turned the Campidoglio 180 degrees to face the Vatican. The Campidoglio's paving pattern depicts a 12-pointed elliptical star, symbolizing a zodiac, with the sun at the center. It is my contention that this long-distance alignment was originally drawn to connect the seat of power in Rome with the Temple of Venus in Jerusalem. In the Christian era, the tomb of St. Peter in the Vatican was strategically located to be a continuation in line with this ancient axis. It is no secret that Christian churches were often built atop places of ancient worship. In this way, pagan shrines were Christianized, and their power absorbed into the body of the church. See how the alignment goes directly over the arch of Septimus Severus? The line passes only a few feet away from the Umbilicus Urbis Romae, the navel stone from which all distances in the Roman Empire were measured. All roads that led to Rome symbolically arrived here. Following the alignment through the Forum, we see that it goes through the center of the Roman Colosseum, where among other pastimes, spectators enjoyed gladiatorial combat and watching Christians being fed to the lions. This shape in the center of the Colosseum bowl suggests the Vesica Piscis. Could this be a symbol of Venus? If so, what went on in the Colosseum somehow became the opposition of the love and beauty associated with Venus. The last stop on our alignment tour is the largest ancient Egyptian obelisk in the world, including all of those still standing in Egypt. The alignment from Jerusalem passes directly over the tip of this 230-ton symbol in front of the Lateran. As you may have guessed, obelisks are one of the keys to unlocking the ancient mysteries. This obelisk wasn't always in front of the Lateran. It originally came from the Temple of Karnak in Egypt, and was moved to Rome by Constantine the Great's son in the 4th century. The last of the Renaissance popes, Sixtus V, moved the obelisk from where it had been in the Circus Maximus to the Lateran, displacing the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius, which, as you know, was moved to the Campidoglio. Now Sixtus V was a very singular pope. As is the custom when a pope dies, the new pope chooses a name for himself. I find it fascinating that Felice Paredi di Montalto chose a name referencing both 6 and 5 in Sixtus V. The fact is, Sixtus V redesigned much of Rome during his brief 5-year reign. He considered moving the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem to Rome, but the logistics proved to be too much. He did, however, succeed at moving 4 gigantic Egyptian obelisks within Rome, completing the Dome of St. Peter's, opening 6 streets, building 14 fountains, and much more. Roman emperors were the first to rate Egypt in antiquity for its obelisks. By repositioning these obelisks in Renaissance Rome, Sixtus V was motivated by something other than Catholicism. Researchers Jan Witcherink and Aaron Parlier reveal much of what Sixtus V was up to. The red line shows a pair of obelisks aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. The blue line shows another pair of obelisks aligned to the winter solstice sunrise. Sixtus V placed Egyptian obelisks in St. Peter's Square and in the Piazza del Popolo exactly as they are, to create the red astronomical alignment. He engaged in a bit of urban renewal by opening a straight street connecting the ancient Roman obelisks at the top of the Spanish Steps and in front of Santa Maria Maggiore to make the blue astronomical alignment visible. Balancing the masculine symbol of the obelisk, Sixtus V restored an ancient aqueduct and built fountains symbolizing the feminine to accompany most obelisks. 4 fountains mark the crossing of the blue and yellow lines connecting the Fontana dei Dioscuri and the Aqua Felice, all watery creations of Sixtus V. The green line connecting the Vatican obelisk with the 4 fountains marks equinoctial sunrise. Sixtus V's tomb in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore was his final gesture, linking his tomb with the astronomical alignments he set up in Rome. Why was Sixtus V obsessed with astronomical symbolism? Perhaps because astronomy is another key to the ancient mysteries. In addition to the solar symbolism mentioned in the Washington, D.C. Part 2 episode, Bernini's redesign of St. Peter's Square has a deeper reading. Witcherink and Parlier claim the 2 fountains flanking the obelisk represent a liquid axis, symbolizing the galactic midplane of the Milky Way. The axis going through the basilica is the ecliptic, and the other 4 paths represent solstices and equinoxes. In other words, the galactic and Earth crosses coming together is an astronomical take on the underlying meaning of the solar octagram star. To top it all off, the Vatican obelisk is surmounted by a cross. The official story is that this massive pagan symbol was Christianized in this simplest of ways, by putting a little cross on top. Hancock and Bevall write in Talisman that an obelisk with a cross on top is actually the hieroglyph for Heliopolis, the city where this obelisk supposedly came from. On Christmas morning, this is the astronomical view from Vatican Square. Witcherink and Parlier have observed that the silver gate of birth is due east of the obelisk in St. Peter's Square on the birthday of the Savior. I notice that the galactic midplane leads right down to the Roman Pantheon. This is our cue to have a look at this ancient Roman marvel and explore its deeper meaning. Patrick Hunt, who teaches classical archaeology at Stanford University, calls the Pantheon the most impressive Roman monumental building in the world. I see it as a calendar in stone. Its rotunda is an engineering marvel, employing techniques such as reinforced concrete, not rediscovered until almost 2,000 years later. In this plan view, you can see the floor pattern in which stone from all over the empire was inlaid, a testament to Rome's imperial might. Its circle and square motif might symbolize the Earth-Moon system in the following way. Here a circle is inscribed within a square. The square has 27.3% more area than the circle. Comparing a circle and square with equal perimeters, the circle's diameter is 27.3% larger than the edge of the square. Okay, so what? Well, the moon happens to be 27.3% the size of Earth, which is another way of relating moon to Earth with the proportion 3:11. In addition, the moon's sidereal orbital period is 27.3 days. The words moon, month, and menstruation all share the same root because they all have roughly the same period. Human gestation lasts on average 273 days. Another spooky coincidence has to do with temperature. As you're probably aware, Celsius is defined by a 100-degree scale, marking the freezing and boiling points of water. Water becomes liquid 273 degrees Celsius above absolute zero. Here are these numbers again. It seems to me that this fact references Earth as a water planet. Why are these numbers the same? Science has no answer for this other than pure coincidence. In this sectional view, you can see that a sphere fits perfectly within the volume the Pantheon encloses. I think recognizing this as the celestial sphere is the key to the Pantheon's symbolism. The original Roman statuary fit into the 7 alcoves. The pantheon of pagan gods was replaced with Christian saints when the building was christened the Church of Santa Maria Rotunda in the year 609. Exchanging pagan gods for astrological symbols, we see an arrangement matching the Ptolemaic harmony of the spheres. To the modern eye, this sequence might seem arbitrary, but it actually ranks the planets in order of increasing apparent speed against the background of fixed stars as seen from Earth. Ptolemaic cosmology is therefore an Earth-centric approach to astronomy. Mark Booth writes in The Secret History of the World, Ptolemy's map of the spheres is conventionally presented as having been superseded by the ideas of Copernicus, Galileo, and so on, but in fact was and is an accurate map of the spiritual dimension of the cosmos, a dimension which seemed more real to the ancients than the material cosmos. Are you aware that the days of the week are named after the planets? With the exception of Saturn Day, Sun Day, and Moon Day, English speakers unfamiliar with Norse gods might have an easier time spotting this connection in French or Italian. Connecting the days of the week in order yields a 7-pointed star, somewhat distorted to accommodate squeezing it into the octagonal symmetry of the Pantheon. Looking up in the rotunda, you see the oculus, or central void in the dome. The oculus is the sole source of illumination in the interior, so it clearly symbolizes the sun. The 5 rising tiers of coffers might represent the 5 planets visible with the naked eye from Earth. The 28 divisions around the circumference is where things really get interesting. It is my contention that the 28 rays represent days. Consider a month of 4 7-day weeks lasting 28 days. 13 such months add up to 364 days. The extra day needed to round out a 365-day year is where we get the phrase, a year and a day. Richard Heath has traced this 13-month plus 1-day calendar to the matriarchal societies of the Bronze Age. The Egyptian Sothic year lasted exactly 365 days, without compensating for leap year as we do today. Sothis is the Greek name for Sirius, the star the Egyptians based their new year on. Any way that Father Time slices it, the 28-day division fits the Osiris story. The Temple of Isis on the island of Philae has bas-reliefs which tell the Osiris story. Here Osiris has 28 stalks of wheat emerging from his dead body. The 13 pieces that Isis later reassembled symbolize the 13-month calendar of 28-day months, and his missing phallus represents the extra day, rounding out the Sothic year. Many religious stories encrypt astronomical information in their core levels. Returning to Egypt for more wisdom, let's take a look at the Earth-Moon diagram that came from studying the Great Pyramid. Recall how the relative sizes of Moon and Earth fit the diagram when the circle was squared. John Michel rediscovered the key to much more ancient wisdom still encrypted in this diagram in his book The Dimensions of Paradise. Michel expanded the number of spheres in the diagram from 1 to 12 for reasons that will soon become apparent. If the mean diameter of the Moon is 2,160 miles, then the 12-moon evolution in the diagram encodes the Great Year. 2,160 times 12 equals 25,920, which is Earth's precessional period. Each month in this so-called Great Year is likened to an age in astrology. We are currently leaving the age of Pisces, and it's the dawning of the age of Aquarius. John Michel calls this the New Jerusalem diagram from his analysis of the Revelation of St. John. A 7-pointed star resonates within. Remember the 7-rayed diadem of Isis and the 7 rays of the Statue of Liberty? I prefer to call this the Isis diagram, in reference to the older stream of knowledge coming out of Egypt. The Isis diagram encodes just intonation in music. On the most basic level, consider 1 octave of a piano keyboard. A total of 12 notes are divided by sharps, leaving 7 white keys. The term sharp suggests the pointy heptagram, doesn't it? As we'll soon see at Chartres Cathedral, music, along with astronomy, geometry, and number theory, are all keys to this ancient mystery. Expanding the Isis diagram to contain 4 7-pointed stars, we have what I call the Osiris diagram, which encodes the Sothic year of 365 days in the following way. The 28 tips of the stars represent days in the ancient month. 12 circles surround a 13th, located at the center of the stars. The circles represent months. 13 months of 28 days each defines the year. The Earth circle underlying the stars represents the extra day and completion of the Sothic year. And the Sothic year was itself calibrated by the heliacal rising of the star of Isis, consort to Osiris. It's beautiful the way the geometry matches the cosmology. The architecture of the universe is embedded in Egyptian cosmology. To perceive the larger ramifications of the cosmology we are rediscovering, let's break away from 2D diagrams and explore where we live, the third dimension. It's a 3D reality that 12 spheres fit perfectly around a central 13th, with all of them tangent to each other, while the 13 fit perfectly within an overarching sphere. I think this 3D reality is the source of the obsession with the number 13 that we've seen symbolized in so many places. Recall all the lucky 13s on the Great Seal of the United States. Lucky 13 might be more precisely described as 12 surrounding 1. In the Last Supper, Da Vinci depicts Jesus in the center, surrounded by 12 apostles. Geometrically speaking, connecting the centers of the 12 surrounding spheres with straight lines reveals what is called the cube octahedron. The cube octahedron has faces composed of squares and triangles, ad quadratum et ad triangulum, as they would say in the Middle Ages. As it turns out, cube octahedral sphere packing has exactly 7 planes of symmetry. Do these numbers sound familiar? 12 around 1 with 7 planes of symmetry? The cube octahedron is the 3D equivalent of the Isis diagram. The first ever known depiction of a cube octahedron was drawn by Leonardo da Vinci. he created this illustration for Luca Pacioli's book, De Divina Proportione. Pacioli and Da Vinci worked together, became close friends, and later shared a house together in Florence. Pacioli was at the center of the Renaissance Hermetic obsession, begun by Cosimo de' Medici in 1430 when he obtained the Corpus Hermetica, a body of work compiled in the first few centuries of the Common Era, recounting words passed down by Thoth through the last of the Egyptian priesthood in Alexandria. Here is Pacioli with a mysterious transparent cuboctahedron half filled with water. Some believe the younger man standing next to him is Albrecht Dürer. In Divine Proportion, Priya Hemingway writes, "In the autumn of 1506, Albrecht Dürer rode from Venice to Bologna to the home of Luca Pacioli in order to be initiated in the mysteries of a secret perspective." Clearly the cuboctahedron was important to these Renaissance masters immersed in Hermetic knowledge. Perhaps they knew something we don't. In the 20th century, Buckminster Fuller was obsessed with the cuboctahedron. He called it the Dymaxion and built his philosophy around it because the cuboctahedron is the only polyhedron completely in equilibrium. All 12 vectors emanating from its core have equal angles, and all of its internal and external edges have equal length. In the 21st century, the cuboctahedron is the foundation for physicist Nassim Haramein's unified field theory that offers a new solution to Einstein's field equations. Haramein claims that the vacuum, a term used by physicists to refer to a volume of space that is completely devoid of matter, actually has a structure, and this structure is based at the core on the cuboctahedron. What we perceive as empty space is actually a seething cauldron of energy. Physicists calculate that the amount of energy in each and every cubic centimeter of space exceeds the energy output of all stars visible to the Hubble Space Telescope. The reason space seems empty is because all that energy is perfectly balanced in a state of equilibrium. It looks to us like nothing is there. Haramein has built his entire unified theory of physics on cuboctahedral geometry. I believe Haramein is really onto something. His latest paper, the Schwarzschild proton, received the Best Paper Award in a physics symposium in 2009. Modern physics seems to be catching up with ancient knowledge. To understand astronomy, one needs to have some background. Here's my crash course on esoteric astronomy in 6 quick lessons. The Earth revolves about the Sun in a plane called the ecliptic. The 12 constellations of fixed stars that intersect the ecliptic are called the zodiac. All the stars of the zodiac are actually our close neighbors compared to the size of our entire galaxy. The Earth's equator is tilted some 23.5 degrees with respect to the ecliptic. Gary Osborne's fascinating Paradigm Shift website shows how the angle of the Earth's tilt is symbolized in art. Here are Isis and Osiris raising the Jed, which amazingly matches the angle of the Earth's tilt. And here again the 23.5 degree angle matches the slope of the pyramid on the dollar bill. Osborne has found this same angle symbolized in many other pieces of esoteric art. The Earth's tilt is the reason we experience seasons. The seasons are defined by the Earth's orbit, which contains 2 solstices and 2 equinoxes. Looking at the solar system from above, the seasons naturally make a cross. Witcherink and Parlier call this the Earth Cross. Our galaxy is called the Milky Way because its myriad stars resemble milk streaking our night skies. If you were able to look at our galaxy edge-on, you would see it as a flattened disk. This flattened structure is what makes the Milky Way look like a narrowly defined streak in the sky, rather than an even distribution of stars. The central plane of the galactic disk is called its midplane. The ecliptic is tilted some 120 degrees with respect to the midplane, naturally making a cross in 2 dimensions. Witcherink and Parlier call this the galactic cross. Imagine beginning a journey outside the galaxy, flying through the zodiac, passing by each one of the visible planets, and stopping on Earth for a while. After a short stay, you begin the journey home, traveling out past the planets, through the zodiac, and on toward the center of the galaxy. This route describes the mystical journey of the soul. It is mirrored in the Ptolemaic or geocentric cosmology that predated Copernicanism. The ancient Egyptians represented beginning and ending waypoints along the journey of the soul with silver and golden gates. Witcherink and Parlier show that the direction of the Silver Gate is located between the horns of Taurus as seen from Earth. You can find the horns by following Orion the Hunter's Club, or Monoceros the Unicorn's Horn, because both point at the intersection of the galactic midplane and the ecliptic, a point known to the Egyptians as the Silver Gate. Isis, shown with horns framing the sun disk, symbolizes her guardianship of the Silver Gate, or Gate of Birth. On the opposite side of the zodiac, the Golden Gate is located close to where the arrow of Sagittarius is pointing, and where the stinger of Scorpio is reaching. The Golden Gate is the second place where the galactic midplane and ecliptic intersect. The winged scarab framing a sun disk was used to symbolize guardianship over the Golden Gate, or Gate of Death. The scarab is an appropriate symbol because of how this insect pushes dung balls backward with its hind legs, mimicking the sun's retrograde precessional motion through the zodiac. The coat of arms for the state of Vatican City features silver and gold keys, because these are the keys to the kingdom that Christ gave to Peter. Pietro Perugino's fresco in the Sistine Chapel shows Christ giving one silver and one gold key to Peter. I see the two Roman arches flanking the fresco as secretly depicting the Egyptian silver and golden gates. The octagonal domed building in the center clearly represents the sun, and the perspective grid must be the ecliptic. The people in the piazza are taking the journey of the soul. I was taught as a child to follow the outer edge of the Big Dipper to find the North Star Polaris. In the past, this rule of thumb didn't always work, because the celestial pole changes over time due to the Earth's precession. When the Great Pyramid was built, the star Thuban in the constellation Draco was the North Star. Remember, one of the pyramid shafts point at Thuban. The celestial pole actually traces out a circle in the heavens, representing the 25,920-year precessional cycle. This cycle is called the Great Year. In 3D, the Great Year is seen as a precessional cone swept out over time by the Earth's tilted axis. The Earth's precessional cone, the Sun, and the galactic midplane will precisely align on winter solstice 2012. Author John Major Jenkins calls this phenomenon galactic alignment. The Mayan long count calendar was designed to end on winter solstice, December 21, 2012. Acharya S. says, in The Christ Conspiracy, many of the world's crucified God-men had their traditional birthdays on December 25th. This date is set because the ancients recognized that the sun makes an annual descent southward until after midnight of December 21st, the winter solstice, when it stops moving southerly for 3 days, and was born again after midnight of December 24th. Thus, these many different cultures celebrated with great joy the Son of God's birthday on December 25th. Christmas 2012 marks the beginning of a new great year. The Milky Way galaxy has a rotational period that I like to call the galactic year. It lasts approximately 224 million years. Our solar system is related to the larger cycle through number. There are 8,640 great years in the galactic year. It's amazing how the Earth's precessional cycle, the number of the sun, and the decad harmonize with the galactic year. Before the Italian Renaissance, there was an earlier flowering of ancient knowledge in medieval France. This was initiated when 9 self-described poor knights of Christ returned from a decade of excavation work undertaken in the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. The most famous preacher of the age, Saint Bernard de Clairvaux, argued persuasively on their behalf at the Council of Troyes in 1129. This resulted in the Templar order being officially chartered and endorsed by the Catholic Church. The poor Templars instantly became a favored charity, and it certainly didn't hurt when the Pope signed an order saying they didn't have to pay any taxes, could pass freely through international borders, and were exempt from all legal authorities save for his own. This also tells you something about just how powerful the papacy was in those days. The Templars accepted large donations and monetary deposits, started issuing letters of credit, opened banks in several countries, and essentially became the first multinational corporation. Very quickly the Templars had an abundance of gold and military power. To me the question is, what did those 9 poor knights find in Jerusalem that led to their meteoric rise in power? Could they have found Enoch's cube buried in the Temple Mount from before the Great Flood? Whatever the case, I believe they unearthed knowledge rather than gold. And with knowledge comes power. Speaking of someone with sacred knowledge, Saint Bernard de Clairvaux is a fascinating figure. Norman Cantor had this to say about Bernard in his book The Civilization of the Middle Ages. Bernard played the leading role in the development of the Virgin cult, which is one of the most important manifestations of the popular piety of the 12th century. In early medieval thought, the Virgin Mary had played a minor role, and it was only with the rise of emotional Christianity in the 11th century that she became the prime intercessor for humanity with the deity. Bernard wrote, "No one can enter heaven unless by Mary, as though through a door." In this illumination, Bernard is shown receiving a stream of milk from the Virgin's breast. He wrote several works on the Queen of Heaven, which was also an epithet used in ancient Egypt for Isis. Essentially, Bernard reintroduced the cult of Isis to the West under the veil of Mary. As the primary architect of the Cistercian and Templar orders, Bernard's writings had a major impact on the Gothic building explosion that ensued all over Europe for the next 300 years. On building, Bernard wrote, "There must be no decoration, only proportion. As you've seen, proportion is what sacred geometry is all about." Although the current Cathedral of Our Lady of Chartres was begun a few decades after St. Bernard's death, Chartres had long before been a pilgrimage center dedicated to the Virgin. Since 876, the site housed the Sancta Camisa, a tunic said to have been worn by the Virgin Mary. When the old church at Chartres burned down, the relic was feared lost. When the Sancta Camisa was discovered unharmed in the ashes, it was deemed a miracle. The dramatic recovery of the relic catalyzed medieval Europe's interest in the building project, and Chartres ended up becoming the first cathedral dedicated to Notre Dame, and one of the finest examples of Gothic architecture in the world. More than a place of religious worship, Chartres was also a cathedral school in the medieval period. In this school, Platonic and Pythagorean thought passed through a Christian filter and resurfaced in the West after a 1,000-year hiatus. Chartres remembers Pythagoras in this sculpture in the right bay of the royal portal tympanum. The 7 liberal arts comprised the curriculum taught in the school of Chartres. The 7 arts were split into 2 groups, the trivium and quadrivium. Trivium is where we get the word trivial, because grammar, rhetoric, and logic were considered basic but necessary skills to master before studying the more challenging quadrivium subjects, which included number theory, music, geometry, and astronomy. Each one of the subjects in the quadrivium serves as a key to the ancient mysteries. The 7 medieval liberal arts were a bit different compared to a liberal arts degree today. These subjects were taught only to the elite. The so-called servile arts were taught to tradespeople employed by the elite. The goal of the servile arts was not to cultivate critical thinking, but to develop specific skills required by farmers, blacksmiths, carpenters, stonemasons, and so on. This liberal, servile division mirrors the internal division between speculative masons, more commonly known as Freemasons, and the operative stonemasons who actually built the cathedral. Australian architect John James has discovered how the floor plan of the cathedral was laid out ad quadratum, as you can see from the red squares. The smaller squares are half the size of the larger, as octaves are related in music. The template for the cathedral ground plan clearly echoes the quadrivium. 2 millennia ago, famed Roman architect Vitruvius described in his 10 Books of Architecture that effective temples are based on the proportions of the human body. Vitruvius's written description of ideal human proportions later influenced many Renaissance artists, including Leonardo da Vinci and Cesare Cesariano. Here, Cesariano's Vitruvian Man fits the cathedral's ground plan and shows that it was based on the proportions of the human body as laid out in antiquity. English professor of architecture Keith Critchlow has discovered a fascinating correlation between the floor plan and front elevation of Chartres. Intrigued by the fact that the rose windows containing the exquisite stained glass and the famed labyrinth have equal diameters, Critchlow compared the plan to the elevation. The rose window and the labyrinth line up perfectly, like so. The golden ball atop the sun tower aligns with the curve of the apse here. The moon tower's silver ball corresponds to the rond point, the center from which the chapels radiate. Clearly the design is correlated in 2 separate dimensions. Boaz and Jachin are the names of the 2 columns that stood at the entry to Solomon's temple that are echoed in all Masonic temples today. Boaz stood on the left, and the name Boaz means sun. Jachin stood on the right and means moon. This symbolism matches the towers at Chartres. Critchlow explains that the sun tower is 365 English feet in height. The moon tower is slightly shorter, some 28 feet less. These measurements suggest several things. Number 1, the design was based on the English foot. Number 2, the 365-foot sun tower symbolizes the year. And number 3, the 28-foot difference in the moon tower symbolizes the 28-day month of 4 7-day weeks. I think this metrology shows how Chartres is a calendar in stone, very much like the Roman Pantheon. Before the Christian era, the grotto below Chartres was a druidic shrine of Isis. Above the crypt today there is a black Madonna and Child called Our Lady of the Pillar, that many suspect has a meaning older than Christianity. The Druid grotto housed a sacred dolmen that was identified with the womb of the earth. Think about it. Both Isis and Mary were called Queen of Heaven, identified as so-called virgins who had unusual conceptions, and later had sons who symbolized the sun, who also shared the same birthday. The story of Mary and Jesus is a recapitulation of the ancient Egyptian story of Isis and Horus. The Black Madonna hints at her African origins while retaining just enough plausible deniability to avert uncomfortable questions for the Church. Chartres Cathedral's axis is oriented to the summer solstice sunrise, just like the red alignment Sixtus V set up in Vatican Square. The labyrinth is not a maze, because there is only one path to follow, like the life we live from birth to death. The labyrinth's 11 concentric rings match the Ptolemaic cosmology, or spiritual dimension of the cosmos. Walking the labyrinth is therefore like taking the journey of the soul. There are 112 cogs on the outside of the labyrinth, a fact which has puzzled scholars. In them, John James has discovered an unexpected connection to the Arab world. John James writes, "The 8th century Arab Sufi alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan divided the 4 elementary qualities of existence, earth, air, fire, and water, into 4 degrees with 7 subdivisions, giving a total of 112 classifications, which between them contained all the materials, liquids, and gases found in manifest creation. Known in the West as Geber, and considered to be the father of chemistry, he worked in the court of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, for whom he wrote the Book of Venus on the art of alchemy. His work paved the way for later Islamic and European alchemists in their search for the philosopher's stone. Among his long list of achievements, Geber pioneered techniques in glassmaking that were used in the stained glass directly above the labyrinth that bears his philosophical number symbolism. Modern chemists still don't understand what gives the Chart glass such incredible vibrancy. Sir Lawrence Gardner says in The Bloodline of the Holy Grail, "One of the greatest mysteries of Gothic architecture is the stained glass used in the cathedral windows. The first appeared in the early 12th century, but disappeared just as suddenly 100 years later. Nothing like it has been seen before, and nothing like it has been seen since. Not only is the luminosity of Gothic glass greater than any other, but its light enhancement qualities are far more effective. Unlike the stained glass of other architectural schools, its interior effect is the same, whether the light outside is bright or dim. Even in twilight, this glass retains brilliance way beyond that of any other." Critchlow says in the Chartres Cathedral, A Sacred Geometry DVD, that he was approached by a Hindu gentleman who explained the meaning of the number symbolism on the western facade. In Hinduism, chakras are traditionally symbolized by lotus flowers with specific numbers of petals. Amazingly, specific details on the facade match this symbolism. The facade is a reminder that the cathedral houses the body of the church, or more importantly perhaps, Chartres is saying the body is a temple. Chartres is a masterwork of hidden syncretism, melding belief systems that secretly transcend Christian dogma. The tympanum above the central front doors of the royal portal encodes an entire cosmology. The 4 figures surrounding Christ depict a man, eagle, lion, and bull. In Christianity, these are the 4 beasts of the Apocalypse as described in the mystical visions of Ezekiel and St. John of Patmos. On the literal level, it's Jesus with a halo waving at us from inside of Escapipes, surrounded by the 4 beasts of the Apocalypse. A strange collection of Christian imagery perhaps, but not uncommon. In time the 4 beasts became synonymous with the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, when you understand the symbolism, a reading of the encoded message becomes possible. As you learned in my crash course in esoteric astronomy, these beasts are the fixed astrological signs symbolizing the galactic cross. Jan Witcherink says Christ's halo represents the Earth Cross. I see the Sun God welcoming you through the galactic stargate at the moment of your apotheosis, a royal portal indeed. I have uncovered sacred design templates underlying the principal section drawing cut through Chartres Cathedral. Stephen Skinner identified circles guiding the central vault and flying buttress designs in his book Sacred Geometry. His observations allowed me to take the geometric analysis a few steps further. I see 2 sets of 3 stacked rhombi guiding the wall design, circles drawn from the tips of paired equilateral triangles define the centers of the buttresses intrados, or lower curves, and mark the spring line of the lower arch. This revolutionary design allowed the masonry to be lighter and the windows larger, admitting the flood of light characteristic of the Gothic style. Now you can appreciate how the walls at Chartres were designed ad triangulum. What is more, the diameter of these circles equals the size of the rose windows and the labyrinth. It's almost as if the designer never changed the distance set between his compasses when designing the entire structure. Critchlow points out that the names of the architects of Chartres were never recorded. They were known only as the masters of the compasses. In researching the House of the Temple in D.C., I came across a rare depiction of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life in Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, shown here as a set of 3 stacked rhombi. This knowledge encoded at Chartres was preserved by Freemasons. For the next revelation, we turn to music and geometry. In music, an octave is the interval between one note and another having double its frequency. In plane geometry, you can symbolize the octave in 2 ways, ad triangulum or ad quadratum. The circle outside the triangle has double the diameter of the circle inside. The circle outside the square has double the area of the circle inside. The central vault is defined by a larger circle having twice the diameter of the smaller circle inside, which itself is equal to the diameter of all the circles in the wall section, the rose windows, and the labyrinth. Chart is therefore based on one circle repeated using musical principles. Amazingly, the flower of life fits this geometry. Perhaps the master of the compasses used the flower as the overarching design template. You can draw the flower of life using compasses only. The nave width is set by a central circle which is tangent to 4 others, having equal diameters. The central circle shown within the yellow triangle completes the picture. Masonic society probably began around the time Chartres was being built. Recall how Saint Bernard de Clairvaux was instrumental in the formation of the Templars, and later, after the Templars were taken down, the knowledge they unearthed from Solomon's Temple went back underground to survive in Masonry, Rosicrucianism, and other secret societies. The Masonic square and compasses emblem often depicts these instruments surrounding the letter G. As with most symbols, the meaning of G depends upon your level of knowledge. I've seen it referred to at times as geometry, the generative principle, and most appropriately for what I'm investigating, the great architect of the universe. I discovered a long-distance alignment that leads from France to the United Kingdom. This one begins very close to Chartres, both in time and space. Chartres Cathedral was built at the same time as Bourges Cathedral, and is only 100 miles away. When I was studying Bourges Cathedral, I kept thinking about the connections between the founder of the Gothic style and the Templars. So I drew a line in Google Earth from the central entry of Bourges Cathedral to the entry of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. So what? You can draw a line between any 2 points, but you won't believe what the line passes directly over in London, the headquarters of the United Grand Freemasonic Lodge of England. The United Grand Lodge of England is the main governing body of Freemasonry within England, Wales, and much of the former British Empire. The building is on Great Queen Street, no less. UGLY, as the organization is known, seems to be a fitting acronym for its Ugly as Sin container, historically third on the site since Masonic meetings first started here in 1775, a year before the American Revolution. Perhaps some of America's Masonic founding fathers planned the revolution here. I'm not sure. When the Templars were around, they controlled a sizable district less than half a mile away in the city of London. The temple includes Temple Church, the adjacent middle and outer temples, and a host of related buildings. The Templars themselves said they designed the round portion of Temple Church after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which also features a rotunda. Perhaps politics motivated them to claim Christian provenance for their temple. Longtime esoteric researcher John Smout says a better geometric comparison is between Temple Church and the Dome of the Rock, which seems to have a high degree of correlation with the round church's ground plan. This makes more sense to me, as the Templars did take their name from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Case in point, they were never known as the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. Whichever building was ultimately their template, the Templar influence was so powerful that they actually got the Patriarch of Jerusalem to come to London and consecrate Temple Church in 1185. Temple Church was brought to the public's attention in the Da Vinci Code, where it was the scene of a shootout amidst marble effigies of medieval knights. The temple served at times as the residence of kings and representatives of the Pope, while Temple Church itself served as a depository bank. I believe Smout's geometric analysis of Temple Church is right on the money, if you'll pardon the pun. The temple plan is laid out with triangles and squares, which we know from studying Chartres Cathedral have hidden significance. Triangles and squares are arranged in such a way as to depict 3 cubes. The symbolism of 3 cubes is something we've seen before, in the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. I believe 3 cubes symbolize the holographic nature of the universe, the human, planetary, and stellar scales resonating as a fractal structure, as above, so below. My reasons for coming to this unusual conclusion will become apparent in the Paris episodes. After the Great Fire of London in 1666, Sir Christopher Wren was chosen to redesign St. Paul's Cathedral. He oriented St. Paul's in line with the axis of Temple Church. Extending beyond St. Paul's, we see the alignment continues to the Bank of England. The bank was chartered in 1694 during the construction of Wren's Cathedral. More than just a local branch, the Bank of England is the central bank of the whole of the United Kingdom, and is the model on which most countries' modern central banks are based. The Bank of England is literally the mother of all banks. Recall how the Templars' meteoric rise in power came in part by becoming the first transnational bank, and how Temple Church itself acted as a bank, whilst housing both royals and papal representatives. By tracing the alignment from Temple Church to the Bank of England through St. Paul's Cathedral, we draw a connection between Templars, the modern banking system, and the Church, 3 powerful bedfellows. The Bank of England presides over a street pyramid in the heart of the City of London. The symbolism of the bank over a pyramid suggests a hidden power relationship, analogous to the House of the Temple presiding over the Pyramid of Washington, D.C. After all, pyramids are clear symbols of hierarchy, and one can read it as control from the top down. The base of the pyramid contains the London Stone, said to be the rock from which all distances in the United Kingdom were measured. The Romans laid this foundation stone in London, just as they had done earlier with the Umbilicus Urbis Romae. You could say this pyramid was built on a rock-solid Roman foundation. Some of the greatest secrets are hidden in plain sight. Isn't that strange? I mean, if you ran a secret society, why painstakingly encrypt your greatest truths in alignments, city plans, and in architecture? I would have thought there were better ways of keeping secrets. There must be some kind of power gained or maintained by hiding these truths out in the open where many can see, but few understand. Sir Christopher Wren was a brilliant mathematician, astronomer, geometer, and architect. He was an enlightened man who clearly excelled in the 7 liberal arts. St. Paul's Cathedral is the most important building of Wren's architectural career. Stephen Skinner pointed out in his book Sacred Geometry that the length of St. Paul's, including its entrance steps, measures 555 feet, and that this distance is equal to the height of the Washington Monument. Recall how triple sixes and fives are encoded in this singular measure, as 6,660 inches equals 555 feet. St. Paul's length therefore symbolizes the relationship between macrocosm and microcosm. The distance from the floor of the cathedral to the top of the cross on its dome is 365 feet, matching the height and symbolism of the sun tower at Chartres. St. Paul's is one of the few places we're not surprised to see the English foot used as the unit of measure. Trying to decipher London from another angle, I was looking at Buckingham Palace and wondering about the perfectly straight axis called the Mall in front of it. Wanting to trace where this obvious gesture leads, I need to ask, where does the royal axis go? It appears that the Mall leads to the Admiralty Arch, but then the axis seems to fade away in the confusion of buildings along the Strand. Or does it? Tracing the axis beginning at Buckingham Palace, passing over the Victoria Memorial, traveling along the Mall, going under the Admiralty Arch and through the buildings on the Strand, the axis arrives precisely at Temple Bar. Temple Bar was a gate designed by Sir Christopher Wren to ceremonially bar access to the City of London. It got the name Temple from being directly in front of the Templar compound. The temple was taken over by the Inns of Court after the Templars were ousted in 1307. The Middle Temple and Outer Temple are two of the Inns of Court to which all barristers in England must today belong. In fact, the phrase the bar, meaning the legal profession as a whole, can be traced back to Temple Bar. Wren's Gate is no longer there, but tradition and the law remain. Traditionally, the Lord Mayor would offer the sword of state to the Queen when she passed through the gate as a token of loyalty. It is a little-known legal fact that the monarch may not enter the City of London without the permission of the Lord Mayor of London. What's up with that? I always thought the Queen was the one in charge. You might be surprised to learn that the Lord Mayor is not the Mayor of London, nor is the City of London the same as Greater London. Confused? The law can do that. The person the Queen bows to is the Lord Mayor of London. He's the guy who runs the City of London Corporation, a tiny private jurisdiction that covers only about 1 square mile. The wealthiest square mile on earth, as it's often referred to, is the sovereign state within Greater London, whose boundary closely follows the ancient Roman walls of Londinium. In Isaac Newton's day, there were more than 200,000 souls living within the square mile, but now that figure is down to less than 10,000. Today, the tiny city of London has become a leading center of global finance. Other powerful sovereign cities within cities that come to mind are, of course, the United Nations headquarters and Vatican City. Let's see if you can guess the final city in my world tour. Here we are over a semi-public urban park. I was drawn to this place when I read it had a small Egyptian pyramid folly, 9 gates, and a 5th-generation watchman who lives in the diminutive rotunda building right here. 5 generations of watchmen living in a tiny pavilion must be motivated to guard something pretty interesting. The informal layout and curving walkways say English Garden, but having been immersed in London, something bigger popped out at me: the shape of the park. It closely matches the ancient walls of the City of London. This park was built by the richest man in the country, who was also a king's cousin. He was a lover of all things English, an enemy of all things royalist. He ended up being beheaded like so many others of his time. Where are we? If you guessed Paris, you're correct. We entered the City of Light through the portal of Parc Monceau, established by Louis-Philippe II, Duc d'Orléans. As you may have guessed, the Duke of Orleans was a Freemason. He actually served as Grand Master of the governing body of French Freemasonry, the Grand Orient of France. The pyramid in Parc Monceau is trivial, however, compared to what the Louvre pyramid encodes. President François Mitterrand commissioned the Louvre pyramid and the adjacent pyramid in Versailles to be completed by 1989 for the celebration of the bicentennial of the French Revolution. Mitterrand personally selected architect I.M. Pei without hosting a design competition, as would be expected for such an important commission. The modern pyramid's metal armature was designed to support a lot of glass. Wikipedia states that the official brochure published during construction cited 666 as its number of panes, but then writes it off as an urban legend because, in actual fact, the pyramid contains a different number of panes. That didn't stop various journalists at the time from drumming up quite a controversy about the number of the beast, and Mitterrand was jokingly referred to as the Sun King for a while. However, I have indeed found 666 rhombi symbolized in the pyramid. Why rhombi, you ask? A rhombus can be made from 2 conjoined equilateral triangles. The rhombus is the masculine or linear element inside the feminine curves of the vesica Pisces, whose name means vessel of the fish, because the Christian fish symbol emerges from it. The rhombus is therefore a sacred symbol. Notice how each of the larger rhombic frames contains 36 rhombic panes of glass. As you can see, the number of rhombic panes on a typical face adds up to 153. This is a very interesting number that has mystical Christian significance. Do you remember the square root of 153 being equal to the number of moons in a year? We learned that fact by studying Stonehenge. Here's a quote from the New Testament that entangles fish and 153 in a Christian net. Simon Peter went up, and drew the net to land full of great fishes, 153, and for all there were so many, yet was not the net broken. This number of fish, why bother enumerating them, has puzzled scholars for centuries, and is an example of how parables in the Bible encrypt important information in plain text. Here's Jesus describing his practice of hiding information in symbols. He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. Tabulating the additional triangles and converting them to rhombi, and then adding the number of rhombic frames, we get 166.5 symbolic rhombi in a typical face, and 4 such faces equals 666. Let's look at the actual Bible quote and see what it tells us in regard to the infamous number of the beast. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Why man is called a beast should be obvious by what humans are doing to this planet's natural environment. We may be bestial in our unenlightened state, but this is beside the point I'm making. The beast here is not Satan, but man. In particular, the Louvre pyramid is about a man. Robert Bauval had a stunning realization described in the book Talisman. He realized the historic core of Paris is correlated with the temples of Luxor and Karnak in Egypt. Luxor and Karnak are adjacent ancient temples. Bauval observed that the 6-degree angle between the axes of Luxor and Karnak matched the 6-degree bend in the Louvre. The temple of Luxor is the one with the embedded 6-degree angle. I went a step further and laid the Luxor ground plan over the Louvre and the Tuileries garden. The Tuileries was laid out by Le Notre at the request of Louis XIV. We see this direct correlation only when the temple plan is mirrored. Might the Sun King's intention have been for Paris to be the mirror of Luxor? Validation that the Temple of Luxor was used as a design template is the fact that the obelisk erected in the Place de la Concorde is from the very same Temple of Luxor. After the Revolution, the Luxor obelisk replaced the guillotine in what became known as the Place de la Concorde. In an outstanding act of engineering, the obelisk was erected by the aforementioned Duke of Orleans' son, who many years after the 1789 Revolution became the last king of France. The important thing to recognize here is that the French obsession with Hermetic symbolism passed through the Revolution completely unscathed. In the early 20th century, modern French alchemist Schwaller de Lubix lived in Luxor for 15 years. Out of his intensive study came the book The Temple of Man, wherein he showed how the Temple of Luxor represents the body of a man. Now we're really on to something. I see the head here, the neck, the heart, all the way to the small chambers of the intestines here. The obelisk is of course his erect phallus. The ancient Egyptians related the cult of the phallus with the dismemberment of Osiris. Next I overlaid the most famous depiction of the human body ever made, Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. See how his leg follows the bend in the Seine? These roads follow the angle of his other leg, and the Luxembourg Gardens seem to parallel his arm. Could the Vitruvian Man be another hidden template in the design of Paris? If so, I suspect the man of Paris is Osiris. Thinking on this, I started to see energy centers in the parterres of the Tuileries. At first I thought they were chakras, but their locations tell a slightly different story. In a normal state of consciousness, people don't see chakras. However, as we learned at Chartres, chakras are part of the architecture of the universe we've been investigating. If chakras exist on another level of reality, call it the etheric body or aura if you will, then their interface in our everyday reality is controlled by the endocrine system in the physical body. Why do we care? Because stimulating and balancing the endocrine system can lead to states of ecstasy, using more of the brain, slowing the aging process, attaining enlightenment, and even experiencing everlasting life, as some believe. I was able to pinpoint gland locations in Paris because of another observation. Many famous public spaces have axial streets pointing directly to where the ductless glands would be in the body of a man. The Church of the Madeleine and Palais Bourbon form a cross-axis directly in line with the obelisk in La Place de la Concorde. On one side we have Napoleon's church venerating Mary Magdalene, who is said to have started the royal bloodline of the Son of God. On the other side is the Palais Bourbon, containing the lower house of the Parliament of France, known as the National Assembly. These two Roman-styled temples energize the gonads in the body of Paris, on either side of his phallus centered on the axe historique. The gland most associated with enlightened states is of course the pineal, which actually looks like a tiny pine cone in the center of the human brain. This colossal pine cone is in the courtyard of the Belvedere in the Vatican, a name which recalls the affluent town of the same name overlooking San Francisco. The pine cone is flanked by two peacocks, which are ancient symbols of resurrection that predate Christianity. Believe it or not, there is an empty black coffin I couldn't get a picture of behind the colossal pine cone that symbolizes the death and rebirth of Osiris. The pine cone in the private courtyard is actually a 1st century bronze that used to act as a fountain in front of the Temple of Isis in ancient Rome. In the Renaissance, Sixtus V built the library wing that closed off the courtyard, perhaps in order to hide pagan symbols not easily explained by the Catholic Church. The pineal gland of Paris marks one endpoint of a line starting at the Paris Observatory, whose construction was incidentally authorized by Louis XIV. This axis passes directly through the French Senate and the Luxembourg Gardens. This cosmic connection to enlightenment is not lost on me. Also notable is the fact that nothing aligns with the thymus or throat chakra. As the throat is associated with speaking and communication, it seems appropriate nothing should energize this center if secrecy is to be maintained. Each of the other alignments is an interesting case study for further analysis. Parc Monceau is right under the Vitruvian man's foot. His outstretched leg seems to point directly at the rotunda building where the gatekeeper lives. The tiny rotunda was designed by architect Claude Nicolas Ledoux, an interesting figure to be sure. Ledoux built 63 toll barrier buildings in the city wall built around Paris in the Ancien Regime to collect taxes. This tax wall was universally hated and was torn down during the Revolution. When the Paris metro was built, it made sense to dig up the city where the extra space for the wall had been, so metro lines 2 and 6 follow the tax wall boundary. Only 3 of Ledoux's tax structures remain today, and the rotunda in Parc Monceau is one of them. I submit that it's no accident that precisely these Ledoux buildings were left intact. We already know about the rotunda, but what is the significance of these other 2 Ledoux buildings? They're all about solar alignment. The red line pointing to the Rotunda de la Villette in Place Stalingrad precisely marks the azimuth of summer solstice sunrise. Look at how this water channel continues the alignment. Some other examples of this alignment we've seen before are the line connecting the Vatican obelisk with the obelisk in Piazza del Popolo, and in the orientation of Chartres Cathedral. The green line pointing to the Barrière d'Enfer, or Gate of Hell, is oriented appropriately due south. It's called the Gate of Hell because Ledoux's pair of tax collection buildings are immediately adjacent to the entrance of the Paris catacombs. This reminds me of the phrase, "Nothing is as sure as death and taxes." The yellow line points to the Trocadero in the azimuth of equinoctial sunset. Trocadero marks the beginning of the white axis, running through the Eiffel Tower and the École Militaire complex. The white line connects Trocadero to the Gate of Hell, but has no astronomical meaning as far as I can tell. The blue line starts at the obelisk at Place Fontenoy, which is right on the white axis in front of UNESCO. This non-Egyptian obelisk commemorates a battle that took place in the year 841, but the obelisk was erected here in 1860. The blue line is precisely the azimuth of winter solstice sunset. Maybe you're wondering where all the colored lines converge. Their common center is precisely at the entrance to the Tuileries garden. But why is it there? Before the Revolution, the Tuileries was a royal palace that closed off the Louvre courtyard. The center point of the solar alignments lies directly in front of the entrance to the royal palace. The palace was destroyed in the chaos of the Revolution, but the alignments remain. Just like the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Louvre Pyramid will yield more secrets upon further analysis. The plan of the Louvre Pyramid and the fountains surrounding it is itself a sacred diagram. Referred to as the sacred cut of Ad Quadratum, the diagram was traditionally used as an astrological house chart in centuries past. Overlaid is the house chart Johannes Kepler made for General Wallenstein in 1608. Yes, that's the same Kepler who discovered the 3 laws of planetary motion that keep telecommunication satellites in orbit today. Astrology is actually very serious business. The Louvre Pyramid acts as entrance to the world's most visited museum. Recall how I overlaid the Vitruvian Man only after analyzing the pyramid itself and finding the mark of the beast encoded within. The Vitruvian Man's mouth corresponds appropriately with this entrance, so the next time you enter the Louvre, ponder its symbolism. You are entering the mouth of the beast. Look at what is aligned with this so-called mouth, the Palais Royal. Central to French history, the Palais Royal is where many generations of royals lived. Louis XIV grew up there, for example. The Duke of Orleans later owned the palace. I was extremely surprised to recognize the 5x12 Jerusalem rectangle precisely framed in the proportions of the royal palace's court of honor. The palace garden's 2 famous lawns symbolize the 2 holiest spots in Christianity and Judaism. There is clearly a royal French connection to the ancient mysteries. Royal of royals, Louis XIV's reign of 72 years was longer and arguably more powerful than any other king in European history. Architect of the Vatican's St. Peter's Square, Gian Lorenzo Bernini allegorically portrayed Louis XIV as Alexander the Great in the famous equestrian statue located in front of the Louvre Pyramid. This statue marks the beginning and faces in the direction of what is called the Axe Historique of Paris. The historical axis runs from the equestrian statue of Louis XIV, under Napoleon's Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel, through the Tuileries, over the Luxor obelisk, under the Arc de Triomphe, all the way along the Champs-Élysées to its endpoint within the Grand Arch in La Défense. French Egyptologist Jean-Marcel Humbert had this to say about the Axe Historique. I have not verified this, but it is said that the Great Axis is a Masonic alignment, and that this is not the result of chance. It is known that the Freemasons find their origins in ancient Egypt. I have verified that the Axe Historique is indeed aligned to the heliacal rising of Sirius, just as is the older Notre Dame on the Ile de la Cité, whose axis parallels the Champs-Élysées. Hancock and Beval trace the origins of this alignment to the fact that Notre Dame was likely built over an ancient Roman temple of Isis. Notre Dame, or Our Lady, is therefore Mary veiling Isis. Perhaps even more amazing, Hancock and Beval show the word Paris comes from the melding together of the words Pharia Isis. Pharia, or Pharos in Greek, is the island where the wondrous lighthouse of Alexandria was, and the center of Isis worship in antiquity. Now let's imagine taking an enlightening ride with the Sun King along the axis he laid out, which was greatly embellished with hidden symbolism by Napoleon, Mitterrand, and many others on up to the present day. For the first destination, we must travel underground, both under the Earth's surface and below public consciousness. La Pyramide Inversée is an underground atrium space surrounded by fashionable boutiques. the downward-facing pyramid is the symbolic opposite to the famous museum entrance. As the upward-pointing pyramid symbolizes a man, the inverted pyramid must therefore represent a woman. In alchemy, the symbols for fire and water are upward and downward-facing triangles. This polarity is also represented in Western mysticism as sword and chalice. The chalice in question is, of course, the Holy Grail. Going with the Holy Blood, Holy Grail thesis, it's fitting that Dan Brown chose to portray the location of the tomb of Mary Magdalene right here, under the pyramid in Versailles, at the end of the Da Vinci Code. If the Star of David is the symbol of the union of male and female, then the star tetrahedron is its 3D equivalent. Drunvalo Melchizedek's volumes on the ancient secret of the flower of life show the human energy field, or Merkaba as it's known, takes the form of a star tetrahedron, male and female being inversions of each other. On a higher level, Richard Hoagland has shown how star tetrahedron geometry is implicated in hyperdimensional energy outflows coming from planetary cores in our solar system. When a star tetrahedron is inscribed within a sphere, its points touch the sphere's surface at 19.5 degrees north and south latitude. On Earth, one of the tetrahedral points is on the Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii, which is actually the largest mountain on Earth if measured from the seafloor. Similar energy outflows occur at 19.5 degrees north or south on Mars' Olympus Mons, which is the largest mountain in the solar system, in Jupiter's Great Red Spot, and Neptune's Great Dark Spot. Explaining these outflows requires a four-dimensional model of physics, where energy is gated from the Sun to the planetary cores through hyperspace. Energy transduced by each planetary body appears to us as heat in 3D, emerging from the most stable of all three-dimensional forms, the star tetrahedron. The simplest way of describing a physics that's based on the same geometry for both planetary and human energy fields would be, as above, so below, the Hermetic motto. Next on our tour is the Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel built by Napoleon. When you stand directly under the central arch, your body symbolically resonates with the sun. The name carousel suggests planets revolving about you. The 12 hedges representing constellations of the zodiac radiate like rays of the sun from exactly where you are standing. In addition to the official allegory of peace being guided by Napoleon's victories, the chariot drawn by 4 horses on top of the arch could just as well be read as the ancient depiction of Helios drawn by 4 horses. The oval that terminates the hedges symbolizes Kepler's scientific discovery that planets have elliptical orbits, and the square hedges must be the 2 foci of the ellipse. Napoleon was most obviously interested in correlating the human body with the sun. Le Notre laid out the Tuileries garden at the request of the Sun King. The garden's proportions, fountains, and parterre patterns amazingly fit the Jerusalem rectangle. See how the fountains are tangent to the X's? The octagonal fountain therefore corresponds with the Dome of the Rock, and the round fountain with the Holy Sepulchre. Paris is another New Jerusalem. When you train yourself to see Hermetic symbolism, it starts appearing all over Paris in plain sight. It can be a bit overwhelming. 2 equestrian statues flank the entrance to the Tuileries from La Place de la Concorde. Her exposed breast suggests this goddess might be Isis. The other rider is Mercury, holding the staff of Osiris, or Caduceus, which has become the symbol of the medical profession. Here's another possible Isis in the garden, and another Mercury. This golden boy is the genie of Paris atop the July column commemorating the Revolution of 1830. The genie is Mercury himself. The first time Hermetic symbolism had come completely out into the open in France was during the 1789 Revolution. Here's the Declaration of the Rights of Man depicting the all-seeing eye of the Supreme Being. Incidentally, this design was influenced by Benjamin Franklin, who was something of a Freemasonic celebrity in Paris at the time. Franklin helped design the Great Seal of the United States, which bears the same all-seeing eye. In time for the celebration of the heliacal rising of Sirius in 1793, this fountain was erected in La Place de la Bastille. The famous artist Jacques-Louis David sculpted the Fountain of Regeneration, with Isis even wearing an Egyptian headdress. The water streaming out of her breasts recalls the image of Saint Bernard de Clairvaux receiving milk from the Virgin. And how can we forget this view, the Eiffel Tower as Phallus of Osiris, with the Statue of Liberty replica on the Seine as his sister bride. The largest square in Paris is up next on the Isis axis. Believe it or not, La Place de la Concorde has an area of precisely 86,400 square meters. Remember the 864-foot-high Transamerica Pyramid and the 864,000 feet from Stonehenge to Silbury Hill? You see, it doesn't matter if we're talking metric or imperial units with shifted decimal places. What matters are the numbers. The fact is, the Sun's diameter is 864,000 miles, and there are 86,400 seconds in a mean solar day. The area of the Place thus confirms it as a solar symbol. The cars are likened to planets wandering around the elliptical traffic circle. The twin fountains symbolize the watery galactic midplane of the Milky Way, just as they do in front of the Vatican. That makes the Champs-Élysées the ecliptic. Les Nôtres designed La Place des Étoiles, where the Arc de Triomphe stands today. Standing at the center of the Place of the Star, the ceremonial arch is read literally as a stargate. 12 streets radiating outward represent a zodiac. The triumphal arch originally honored the warriors who fought for France in the Napoleonic Wars, and it later became the tomb of the unknown soldier. The eternal flame under the arch might be another solar reference. There's certainly a lot of sun worship going on in Paris. Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798, and not even counting the Egyptians, the French death toll came to more than 20,000 souls. After France's great defeat, Napoleon was asked why he decided in the first place to invade Egypt. He said, "I came to draw attention and bring back the interest of Europe to the center of the ancient world." While the campaign was raging, Napoleon spent a night alone in the Great Pyramid, and when asked about his experience, he supposedly said, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Moving on toward the strange attractor at the end of the axis, we finally conclude our journey through space and time at La Grande Arche. Contemporaneous with the Louvre Pyramid, the Grand Arch was also built at the request of President Mitterrand. This time Mitterrand held a national design competition, but personally selected architect Johann Otto von Spreckelsen in the end anyway. Unfortunately, Spreckelsen died before the project was completed. The location of the Grand Arch has a special relationship to the Arc de Triomphe, the Luxor obelisk, and the Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel. All four monuments are spaced in such a way to create this approximate doubling pattern, suggesting musical octaves. In addition, the Arc de Triomphe is roughly double the size of the Arc de Triomphe du Carrousel, and the Grand Arch is about double the size of the Arc de Triomphe. In the scaling of these three arches, I see three stargates representing the human, planetary, and stellar bodies, just as we saw symbolized with cubes in London and DC. Notre Dame Cathedral fits perfectly inside the Grand Arch. I'm guessing this is no accident. A tune in 3 octaves, if you will. I call it the Symphony of the Stargates. The dimensions of the monumental structure are cubic, with edge length measuring approximately 110 meters, or 360 feet. Researcher Jim Allison realized that 360 feet is also precisely equal to 210 Egyptian royal cubits, and I see that the office windows inside the arch are arranged in groups of 210, providing validation of this metrology. The exterior side's symbolic measure depicts 22/7 in meters. 22 over 7 is, of course, an approximation of pi. 12 columns internally support the structure, and a zodiac is literally depicted in the basement floor, making the arch yet another form of sun worship. The sides of the monumental arch actually contain some 40,000 square meters of office space. Multi-purpose rooms in the basement measure 400 square meters each. These numbers got me thinking. 40,000 and 400 are very interesting numbers. To appreciate this, let's start with the metric system. The metric system was originally defined by measuring the Earth. The original prime meridian passed through the Paris Observatory and continued all the way around the Earth. This circumference was defined as 40,000 kilometers in the 18th century, and this served to define the metric system. There are 121 documented bronze medallions marked Arago after the French astronomer embedded in streets and sidewalks in a line crossing Paris. These medallions mark the line of the Paris prime meridian that was used in France for 200 years. This line touches the corner of one of the Louvre's satellite pyramids. Perhaps this is why the smaller pyramids are there. The meter is the basic unit of length in science today. The meter's definition moved from being based in earth measure to a prototype bar to being circularly defined in terms of the speed of light, which is itself measured in meters per second. Christopher Knight and Alan Butler's book, Who Built the Moon, is really an eye-opener. Although I don't agree with their thesis that the moon is an artificial satellite, they have discovered numbers relating sun, moon, and earth that are too perfect to be the product of random chance. For example, consider a solar eclipse. When one happens, the moon completely covers the sun disk. The only reason this can occur so precisely is because the moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun, and happens to be 400 times closer than the sun during the eclipse. The Earth also turns 400 times faster than the moon. The odds of these three seemingly unrelated characteristics would all converge on the number 400 is literally astronomical. As I already mentioned, the axe historique is aligned with the heliacal rising of Sirius, known as the Star of Isis. But the Grand Arch is turned approximately 6 degrees with respect to this axis. This is, of course, no accident. Everything has a purpose. Can you imagine the mind-boggling planning that went into the Grand Arch alone? Groundbreaking architectural design that ties together layer upon layer of hidden symbolism, completing the hermetic masterpiece that is Paris. Jim Allison has found what the Grand Arch is pointing to. Are you ready for this? It points to the birthplace of Isis in Dendera, Egypt. This tiny, unassuming temple out and back of the larger Hathor temple is known as the traditional birthplace of Isis. The location of the small cube within the larger enclosure matches the azimuth where the Grand Arch is facing. Remember that the heliacal rising of Sirius was the basis of the ancient Egyptian calendar. Well, here is where all of that started. This is where ancient Egyptian priests saw her bright star rising just before the dawn, signaling the beginning of a new year. Isn't it amazing that the Champs-Élysées and Pennsylvania Avenue share the same astronomical orientation with this tiny backwater in modern Egypt? Backwater it may be today, but symbolically it's the holiest place in the cult of Isis. Napoleon came here and had a master mason cut out this massive ceiling from the adjacent temple and ship it back to Paris. It's called the Dendera Zodiac and is now suspended in the Louvre. As you can see, the Dendera Zodiac has octagram star symmetry. More than a zodiac, it is a planisphere showing the whole cosmology as seen through Egyptian eyes. Another Louvre ceiling that gets to the essence of things is François-Edouard Picot's Study and Genius reveal ancient Egypt and Greece. Hancock and Bivol recognized the importance of this hermetic work in their book Talisman. The painting allows the viewer to see Isis unveiled for Athena. This unveiling references Plutarch's first-century depiction of her temple at Sais, where it was inscribed, I am all that has been, and is, and shall be. My veil no mortal hath ever raised. The term genius in the title is the epithet of the divine messenger Mercury, who is introducing Athena to Isis. I think the Western world, exemplified by Athena, is being introduced to the older stream of knowledge coming out of Egypt. As I can attest, the term study in the title refers to the intensive research required to uncover the deep Egyptian connections that the elite is so clearly obsessed with. Returning to Paris, let's look at the Grand Arch with fresh eyes. Remember that everything has a reason. The Grand Arch is in La Défense, the modern section of Paris. Why? We need a modern mathematical understanding to perceive its deepest symbol and to recognize it for what it truly is, a three-dimensional shadow of a hypercube. Come again? What is a hypercube? If the square is 2D, the cube is 3D, and the hypercube is the 4D equivalent. Here's what a cube looks like when it's being rotated. Here's what rotating a hypercube looks like in three-dimensional projection. The fourth dimension is hard to imagine because it's literally beyond us. You might be interested to learn that 4 spatial dimensions were known far before the birth of modern science. Here is what Saint Bernard de Clairvaux wrote to his former disciple, who became Pope Eugene III. What is God? He is length, width, height, and depth. There are 4 spatial terms used. Bernard described the 4th dimension in the 12th century. St. Paul also described 4 dimensions in the 1st century. That Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, that ye, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth and length and depth and height, and to know the love of Christ, which passeth knowledge, that ye may be filled with all the fullness of God. 4 centuries before Paul, Plato even described higher dimensional reality in his allegory of the cave, which goes something like this. We are prisoners chained in a cave and sit facing a blank wall. There's a fire outside the cave, and unseen people are passing in front of it. We see shadows on the wall, and mistake this illusion for reality. I think we are kept in the dark about a great many things. Notice how the hypercube's shadow in 3D projection looks like a cube within a cube. This structure is fractal, meaning the same pattern repeats at different scales. We've seen things like this before in cities, buildings, and art. Consider the fractal-like City of London within Greater London, Vatican City within Rome, and the United Nations headquarters within New York City. On the scale of a building, take a look at the Dome of the Chain standing immediately outside the Dome of the Rock. It's the same structure repeated in a smaller scale, hinting at a higher dimensional connection for those who have eyes to read the symbolism. Examples from art are Pomodoro's series of golden spheres within spheres, scattered strategically in the Vatican, UN headquarters, museums in DC and San Francisco. The sacred Egyptian cubit is a unit of measure reserved for measuring the earth. 1 sacred cubit is equal to 6/5 raised to the 4th power in English feet. Think about it. Raising to the 4th power means the sacred cubit is literally a hypercubit. Michel and Heath have found there are 10 million hypercubits in the Earth's polar radius and 63 million hypercubits in its meridian circumference. Now these amazingly round numbers measure our planet with remarkable accuracy. How can this be? Some physicists believe the universe is made of 10-dimensional superstrings, but 6 of them have curled up into unimaginably small size. The 4 remaining dimensions express the architecture of the universe. Recall how I saw in the union of both Louvre pyramids the knowledge of how energy flows from the sun through hyperspace into planetary bodies. In addition, the Earth is measured by a hypercubit whose edge length of 6/5 relates macrocosm to microcosm. The Earth is therefore a hyperdimensional object, even though with our normal perception we experience both the Earth and ourselves as being only 3-dimensional. Another projection of the hypercube into 2 dimensions looks like this. Do you see the octagram star within? This is where it all comes from. The sun is a hypercube. Recall Metatron's cube. Now that we understand the grand arch, we perceive Metatron's cube as Metatron's hypercube. This 4D solar symbol appropriately contains the 3D star tetrahedron and the 2D Star of David. We see now why these sacred diagrams are both called stars, because they are projections of our sun, which is itself a star. To make all of this 4-dimensional geometry easier to understand, it helps to bring it down a level. Unfolding a square gives you a line. Unfolding a cardboard cube gives you a cross. Unfolding a hypercube gives you a cross made of cubes. Salvador Dali started with this idea when he painted the Corpus Hypercubus. He depicts the crucifixion, yes, but what is he really saying? Corpus Hypercubus is the ascended body as hypercube. In analytic cubism, the art movement that anticipated Dali's surrealism, Picasso and Braque depicted objects from a multitude of viewpoints in an effort to see all sides at once. Of all the myriad forms in existence, why did they choose a cube to symbolize their art movement? Could these cubists have been privy to secret knowledge that inspired their attempt to paint the 4th dimension? Or did they follow unconscious synchromystic inspiration? Food for thought. So now we have the human body, the earth, and the sun symbolized as hypercubes. 3 cubes if you want to use a 3D symbol. So which is it? It's actually all of the above. The human, planetary, and stellar scales resonate as a fractal structure within the holographic universe. In simpler terms, as above, so below. Metatron's hypercube, as Enoch's hypercube, reveals the cosmic man. Enoch's triangle had the ineffable name of God written on it. Here is that name in Hebrew, which is a language read from right to left. Standing the letters up, we see the depiction of a man made in God's image. The cosmic man is Plato's world soul, alchemy's anima mundi, and the Kabbalah's Adam Kadmon. Here is a piece of my own artwork showing Adam Kadmon emerging from the tree of life. If the human body is a temple, then this temple is much more vast and interconnected than we ever imagined. The human energy form resonates with the esoteric architecture of the universe. What we know as the history of civilization is only a very small part of our past. There is something extraordinary about our beginnings not written about in history books. The oldest surviving temples encode an understanding of Earth, Moon, and Sun that is in some ways more advanced than modern science. To catch up with ancient knowledge, a broad interdisciplinary approach is clearly indicated. Specialists in art history, archaeology, architecture, philosophy, semiotics, mathematics, physics, and many others will need to cooperate in new ways. By seriously studying Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid, we've seen how people living at the dawn of civilization possess the ability to accurately measure the size of the Earth, and to survey long distances with a precision rivaling GPS satellites. Logically, our civilization must therefore be a legacy from an earlier civilization. Whether this was Atlantis and/or an off-world civilization, I cannot presently say with certainty. The rediscovery of the importance of number, geometry, music, and astronomy should rekindle interest in ancient Egyptian knowledge passed down to us by philosophers such as Pythagoras and Plato. Understanding how the macrocosm and microcosm are related through the art of sacred geometry, in the act of measuring structures and the earth, is a thing of profound beauty. Relating 6s to 5s by drawing hexagons and pentagons in the landscape, or by measuring with Egyptian units, are brilliant examples of this ancient science at work. Finding Pythagorean triangles, 5 by 12 rectangles, pyramids, octograms, enneagrams, and zodiacs encoded in much of the world's great architecture and urban design exposes an obsession with ancient symbolism spanning the centuries. If the designers take this symbolism so seriously, then there must really be power in ancient knowledge. Putting this story together has been by far the most challenging and satisfying project of my professional life. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I invite your participation in uncovering more secrets in plain sight. This is Scott Onstott, and I thank you for sharing my journey.